You are now tuned into the Black Law Students Association of Canada's YouTube.
Welcome to the BLSA Canada Fireside Chat series. My name is Katya Stella Assoé, and I am a Communications Committee member and recent LLB graduate. Today, I am joined by Professor Ubaka Ogbogu, who is an associate professor in the Faculty of Law at the University of Alberta and a shining example of the importance of advocacy amid trying times. So we're really honored to have you with us today. Thank you for joining us.
I'm very excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Yes. So let's start with a little introduction for the folks that don't really know much about you and what it is that you do. So could you tell us a little bit about your law school journey, your law school career research journey, and maybe add in there like a little fun fact that you would like us to know?
Okay, so I am a law at the University of Alberta, as you've heard already through your introduction. I started at the U of A Faculty of Law in 2011, so I've been there for quite a while, and I actually did my master's degree in law at that law school. So I've been part of that law school since 2002, when I moved to Canada for graduate studies. I teach a variety of courses at the Faculty of Law at the University of Alberta. My primary expertise is in health law and science policy. I teach upper year courses in that area, but I also teach first year torts. I used to be cross-appointed to the Faculty of Pharmacy, but my cross-appointment ended last year, so I'm now 100% in the law school, where I teach courses in health law and science policy, biotechnology law. I teach a jurisprudence course that's focused on law and science. And I will also next year be teaching public health law and policy. So I generally do work in that area, health law and science policy, looking at a diverse range of issues in that area. I started my law school journey, or my legal career and law journey in Nigeria, in West Africa. That's where I was born and that's where I grew up. I went to the University of Benin in Nigeria, in a city called Benin City. That was a long time ago. And then I did Nigerian law school, which is where you go when you finish law school to get a BL and be called to the bar. I practiced law for a bit in Nigeria, about 3 to 4 years. And then I decided to move into academia. So I got a job as an assistant professor in one of the law schools in Nigeria, the University of Nigeria. And from then I decided to do a master's degree in law. And that brought me to Edmonton, Alberta. And I finished my master's, met my wife here in Edmonton. And then went on to University of Toronto, where I got a PhD. And after that, we also had a child in the process. And after that, there was a little stint that I did in the United States before moving back to Alberta, because I was hired back at the University of Alberta as a tenure track professor. And so my wife and I came back here with our little daughter, and we now have 2 daughters. And we've lived here ever since. So that's the story in a nutshell. Fun facts about me. I have a mild obsession with fashion listicles. I read a lot of like lists, GQ and Esquire. I'm generally very interested in fashion. I like wristwatches. I collect mechanical wristwatches. I like spy novels and spy movies. I have a mild obsession with that as well. What else? I write poetry. I don't know if it's any good. And I like people. One of my favorite things to do is hang out with people. I'm very extroverted. That's a lot of fun facts. Okay, there you go.
Those are really fun facts. Thank you for sharing all of those with us. So, law schools across Canada often have very few to no Black professors. I mean, in my case, I had 2 Black professors in my first year. I was pleasantly surprised, but then not so surprised when I ended my bachelor's and I still only had 2 Black law school professors. So, what do you think the biggest barriers to entry are for Black students seeking to pursue PhDs? And how can law schools and organizations such as the BLSA reduce those barriers?
Wow. How many hours do we have for this interview? I have
We
a lot
don't
of
have that much
thoughts.
time. Try to keep it short. Try to keep it short.
Okay. I have a lot of thoughts on that question. Of course, it's a crisis in my view. It's a big problem. At my law school, there's only one Black law professor, and we've only ever had one full-time tenure track or tenured professor in the history of the law school, and that's me. Some law schools don't even have any presently. So having two is quite an abundance of riches in my view. I think the biggest barrier for law students looking to move into an academic career is partly a lack of visibility of people in that role that they can model their career after. Also suggests a lack of mentorship. But I think it's also because law schools are not very good at setting out different career paths for law students. We have very few law students to begin with in law schools. My law school has, I don't think any more than 5 presently, probably I think 4 at the last count. And the minute you, as you will know, and as most of your viewers or all of your viewers will know, the minute you hit law school, there's only one career path that is really presented to you with any seriousness, and that is law practice. So partly it's because you don't see too many people to model yourself after in that role who are Black. And it's partly because law schools just do a very terrible job of presenting different career paths to students. And when it comes to Black students, it becomes even worse. They don't even do enough to help Black students to even get into that main career path. That's also a big problem. And you then find that Black students, at least in my experience, struggle with getting into firms. And for them, it then becomes a matter of, disappointment after disappointment, and you don't even start to think about alternate careers because the main one that's even presented to law students is not readily available to you. I could spend hours on this question. I think it's one of the biggest failings of law schools across Canada. They don't do enough for Black students, obviously. They don't do enough for Black people. And if I may just add one quick thing, I think if you look at law schools as they are right now, you won't be encouraged as a Black person to even exist in them, how much more work in them. They're not very hospitable places for Black professionals. My journey through law schools in Canada have been really a struggle and a lot of perseverance and a lot of, changing my personality to fit the environment as opposed to having the environment embrace me as a person. It's a tough place to be. And if you have something else to do that is not in a law school, not that the larger society is better, but it's not a very hospitable place for Black people or for racialized persons in general.
And as somebody who's made it through past those barriers, what are some things that you would have liked from, because I don't know if organizations such as the BLSA were already put in place when you were going through it, but now that there are organizations such as that one, what are some things that you would say, I would have liked that from those organizations, or this is something that they should do to support people like me or that want to be where I am?
So I haven't made it through the barriers. I'm still living in the barriers. I'm still working in the barriers. I'm still facing the barriers every single day. They don't ever go away, actually. The notion of making it, I don't think exists for racialized persons. Even for someone like me, I still have those struggles. I have career setbacks. I have, things that, I don't readily discuss publicly, which still affect me as a Black professional working in a law school. But I also don't think it is the task of Black organizations to correct these failings. I don't think organizations like BLSA, which didn't exist in my time, should have the task of correcting the very things that they face. I think they should focus instead on being a rallying point for persons who are oppressed and racialized, for them to, it should be an outlet for them to be able to sort of share their collective wisdom, collective pain, and advocate for their own needs. But I don't know if I'll put on them the responsibility of changing these institutions or correcting the failings of these institutions. I think that should lay squarely at the feet of those who actually run the system and who are responsible for the systemic problems. But be that as it may, I think one thing Black organizations can do is what I've just described, is be a rallying ground for Black persons, a place to sort of gather and share the collective wisdom and pain, and to also serve as a starting point for advocacy, for a way of reaching those who control the system and letting them know what Black people are saying and what Black people are feeling and what they're doing within these institutions. So that to me is the primary thing, to just be there. Because when I went to law school, when I did my master's here, that didn't exist. When I did my PhD, that didn't exist. And, it can be very alienating to not have anywhere to go if you're looking for people who you share at least something in common with, in terms of what we're talking about. And I think the fact that these organizations exist now is a good thing, because at least it's a gathering point for people to start to discuss the kinds of common problems that Black people face.
I 100% agree. And you mentioned earlier how law faculties aren't a welcoming space for Black professors, and they aren't that welcoming for Black students either, that don't see themselves represented in staff or even among their peers. And there's always a big emphasis on mentoring, right? How do you think mentorship assists Black law students and can enable them to kind of thrive and succeed in this field that's kind of cold towards us,
Right. It's huge. I have assumed that, as somebody who has assumed that role over my career, I know how important it is to Black students. I know how important it is to racialized students in general. It can be the difference between succeeding and failing. It can be the difference between having a good experience and a terrible experience. It makes a huge amount of difference. In my experience, it serves as a way of providing that sense of community, that sense of belonging, that Black students would often struggle with when it doesn't exist. It's also a place to just share some of those sort of cultural touchstones that, I enjoy when a Black student comes into my office and we can talk about things we intuitively understand as Black people. And it doesn't even matter if we're, from two different regions of the world. There's some things that Black people understand intuitively that we can talk about, and that can give you the kind of grounding and sense of belonging that is often missing. But it's also a part of the mentorship where, when you connect with another Black person and you connect with a Black person who's a mentor, you don't need to say much about what it is that you want to talk about before they understand it, before they get it. They don't second guess you. They don't, when you say you've suffered racism, for example, they don't try to minimize it. They don't try to make you the devil's advocate or make you see it differently, because the mentor is going through the same thing as well, and they can immediately connect to the issue and to the problem. So I think it makes a huge difference. I see my role, my primary role at the U of A Faculty of Law, not as a law professor who just teaches and does research, but as someone who's there to support my students in their learning journey. That's actually how I see my role. And I take that role very seriously. But for me, it becomes a massive mission when it comes to Black students. It's, for me, it's something I really believe is central to my role as a law professor. And so I think it makes a huge difference in the lives of law students, and Black law students especially.
Yeah, well said. And would you have any advice for students who, let's say, don't have access to mentoring, that want to reach out to lawyers and professors, but that are a little bit intimidated? I can talk about my own experience. I mean, I went into law school with no family in the field, so that's already kind of scary to jump into that boat. Nobody really looks like me, and sometimes, even if there are some Black professors available, sometimes law professors are kind of put on a pedestal, those are the people that kind of know what they're doing, and there's sometimes that barrier. What advice do you have for people like me, for students who kind of are intimidated, don't know how to go about it, but that still kind of have a desire to reach out and to learn?
Yeah, I mean, I can't speak for every law professor, but I know that this is something that many of my colleagues and I hear all the time and worry about a lot. This notion that was somehow not approachable or shouldn't be approached, right? We struggle with it. I don't think we do enough to communicate to students that that's not the case. Now, I'm not saying every law professor is like that, but most of us do make ourselves available for students, just generally speaking. But I think if you're a Black student, and this is not to say that all Black students fit one mold. Obviously, Black law students come in all shapes and sizes. But I think if you're struggling with the things you've described, a good starting point would be to just take that step and approach a Black professor, a Black law professor, or just another Black professor at university. So I think we understand as Black professors that we just can't exist in these spaces and not be mindful of those who are coming behind us and who represent for us a sense of community that is different from just belonging to this community, this university. So many of us do understand what the mission is when it comes to Black students. And I think approaching a Black professor and saying, no, how do I do this? How do I navigate these spaces is a good starting point. It is possible that you will approach one and they go, look, I'm busy, I don't have time for this, or, I'm not here for this. It is possible that will happen, but I can almost guarantee that will be the exception to the rule. It will be an anomaly for you to approach a Black professor and they dismiss you. All the Black professors that I know, at least at the U of A, are invested in the Black community within the university. We go to the events, we support, the minute you asked me for this interview, my reaction was, yes, I'm going to do the interview. I am busy, but I will make time for that. Because we understand what's at stake. But also, Black members of the profession do generally respond in the same way as well. At least that's my sense that I get, having dealt with many of them as well. Now, the other thing, especially if you exist in a space where there's not a lot of Black people, 2 years ago, we had only one Black law student and one Black professor at the University of Alberta, right? So if I said to that Black student, sorry, I don't have time, you can imagine that then it becomes a big problem for that student. But, we exist in spaces where we have to be brave. We have to create opportunity where there's none. We have to create community where there's none. We have to create our success where all we see in front of us is barriers. So even when it doesn't exist, you have to take that step. You have to just be braver than usual. And that's the story of underrepresentation and lack of inclusion. At some point, you're gonna have to start something. I think that's me quoting Michael Jackson, but anyway. And I'll give an example. You know, the one Black law student we had 2 years ago started the BLSA U of A chapter. You know, she came in, there was not a Black law student. There was only one other Black person in the entire law school. And, you know, she said to herself, you know, this doesn't seem right. And she had struggles with starting the Black Law Students Association. You know, the university had a rule that you needed 10 persons to start a student group. There was only one law student. So that's a struggle, but, you know, she did it. And now it's a thing that exists at the University of Alberta Law School. And that's the kind of bravery we need. We need to start things where there's none. We need to take the step when it doesn't exist, and we need to create those opportunities for ourselves.
Yeah. You talk a lot about bravery, and last year you were very brave in sharing the hate mail and voice messages that you received as a result of questioning the government of Alberta's response to COVID-19. We talk about bravery. That's something that takes a lot of courage. What advice do you have for students who want to be brave like you, who want to speak out on issues that they care about, but that fear reprisal or pushback, whether it be from their own peers, whether it be from the public, from teachers, from the universities? What advice do you have?
Yeah, so I mean, I understand the fear, and I understand what the hesitation would be, because, you know, I couldn't, in all honesty, say that stepping forward that way would impact you negatively. Throughout my career, speaking up has actually impacted me in many ways. It's delayed my career. I've had the reprisals you talk about. So there's real consequences to doing it. The one thing that has really helped me is an ability to pick my battles. You can't fight. There's so much going on. There's so much racism in our society. There's, you know, it's an everyday thing. There's microaggressions, there's actual aggression. There's all kinds of things that you face on a daily basis, and you can't fight them all. It's physically draining. It's challenging for the other relationships you have, for keeping the other relationships you have in your life going. And so I have a very good sense of, and I think people ought to develop a good sense of what kinds of issues cross the line for you, and for which you're going to actually pursue. And I think what that does is it helps you sort of, you know, it can be difficult for people to say, I'm not going to fight that, I'm going to fight that. But it helps you sort of make sure you don't sort of spread yourself too thin, and then you get into a point where it becomes a problem for you, both mentally and physically. So you have to know which kind of issues really are worth responding to and devoting that much time, which ones cross the line for you. And for me, they're usually issues that go beyond the personal, that will have an impact on my community as I see it, and where I feel like not speaking up will set us back in a very significant way. And once that happens, then it becomes important to really make sure that you're not just crafting a message, but you're crafting a message that members of the community will support. You might, even in situations where, in spaces where you're alone because you're the only person, there are people who will support you if the message resonates with them, and if they feel like what you're saying is something that is going to benefit the community. And so that messaging becomes important, and the understanding that even when you start to receive these threats, there's a lot of good people on your side and people who will rally to support you in what you're doing. Those threats bothered me because of the way they were issued. The person called my phone number and emailed me, and the messaging, what they sent to me was, suggested that they knew how to get to me. But what allowed me to be brave about it was the fact that I also got a lot of messages from other people saying, we're behind you, we support you, keep doing what you're doing. Don't let these, people who are in the minority affect you and affect the mission. But they wouldn't say that if they didn't think the message I was trying to spread was important. They wouldn't say that if they didn't think the fight against the provincial government was the right kind of fight, right? And so that's kind of how I approach it. I don't know if there's any advice that comes out of that, but for me, it's mainly having a good sense of what your limits are and your limitations are, and knowing that it is good to not drain yourself completely by, trying to whack everything that pops up, picking up issues that will resonate with the community, will have a huge impact if you're able to drive change, and expending energy on those issues, and knowing fully well that, at every step of the way, there might be an unseen community, or there's an unseen community that is going to support you or that are behind you, even as you struggle to navigate those barriers and navigate the reprisals and all of that. The reprisals don't bother me so much, to be honest, because I always have this feeling that what is going to come to you will come to you. I think something that my grandmother told me a long time ago, people can't really take away the things that are coming to you. They might try to stop you, but, you'll get what's coming to you. That's as simple as it is. And you shouldn't let that, the things that they try to stumbling blocks they try to put in front of you deter you from speaking your mind and being yourself. Because for every person who says, I don't like what you're doing, there's going to be a lot more people who are going to support you if they feel that the message is right and if you feel that what you're saying is something worth supporting.
That was very, very powerful. Really, the bit about choosing your battles really struck with me. And by choosing your battles, and despite the pushback that you might have received or that you might still receive by being such an outspoken person about the issues that are close to your heart, you're still a very accomplished academic. I mean, you're a member of numerous boards, of numerous councils. Given this, what career accomplishments would you say are the proudest, that you are the most proud of? Let's bring a little bit more positivity,
Right. Yeah. No, I am proud of all of them. I started out in a small village in Nigeria, and I am at the U of A Law School, and I have done all of these things. So I'm proud of all my achievements. I'm proud from every one of them, from going through elementary school to up to until this stage. It's all great stuff. But the one that I found, at least that's very profound for me, especially profound for me, is becoming, I believe, the first Black vice president social of the Graduate Students Association at the University of Alberta. It is possible that I might actually be the first Black member of the executive of the Graduate Students Association of the University of Alberta. And that was when I arrived from Nigeria in 2002, and the Graduate Students Association, there was an election, and I remember going around and saying to the very few Black students at the U of A at the time, graduate students at the U of A at the time, I'm going to run for this. And they're like, why would you do that? You're never going to get in. It's all those white people who run the organization. I'm like, well, if we don't try, we're not going to know. If you don't try, you're not going to succeed or fail. So I'm going to And for me, it was one of those things where, you're new in this place. I'm struggling to be understood by people. I didn't speak this way that I speak now then. I generally am a very fast talker, but coming from Nigeria, everyone told me I had an accent. Everyone said I spoke too fast, the usual stuff. And so I'm throwing myself into this situation where people don't necessarily relate to me in the way that they relate to the kinds of people that I used to seeing every day. And I'm running for this position, which is a very important position in the Graduate Students Association hierarchy. Not just the parties and the social events, but also the food bank. You're the chair of the food bank, the university food bank. You on some very important university committees, and it was a contested position. And I won it. And that for me was very profound. It was a huge achievement for me. It actually set me on the path that I am now, because it opened up university to me. It allowed me to sit on various boards in the university. It allowed me to learn about the university. It made me develop a love for being on campus and being a part of the university structure. I was able to meet people who see me in those settings, got to understand me better as a person and to relate to me differently. And it allowed me to relate to them in the same way as well and to understand them better. And so that's the one I'm really proud of, because it's one that came from nothing. There was nothing I had at the time that suggested that was an obvious role for me, at least to the people who are looking at it, looking at the people who are running for it. And it showed me that if you actually sort of believe in yourself and, go for it, it will happen for you. I was the only Black member of the executive. And I met all these people who I still have good relationships with. And so for me, it was, it goes to that bravery I was talking about so believing in yourself and stepping into these spaces and trying to create the opportunity where it doesn't exist. And so I'm very proud of that one. I know it's kind of weird to be, student governance, but that's what I'm proud of the most.
No, I think that's something to be really proud of.
Thank you.
All right, so are we good to continue? Because we're already half an hour in. Okay, just wanted to check.
Yeah, I'm good. I'm here to chat. Yeah.
Love it. And I'm enjoying every second of this.
Awesome.
Law school is often fast-paced and demanding. It can be hard to navigate through all of that, and hard is an understatement. From the perspective of a professor, what are the qualities of the best law students that you've taught over the years? And maybe add a little bit of advice for students that want to excel academically and further on professionally.
Okay. So the qualities of the students, do you say the best students that I have?
The best law students.
The best law students
that you've had.
I mean, law students are awesome generally. I think, the best in terms of academic achievement, because best to me means a lot of things, a lot of different things. Many of the law students I remember, my friends, did not necessarily get on the dean's list, but are best just in terms of attitude, the ability to connect to people. There's different ways I best, but let's go best in terms of academic achievement, because I think that's what you want to know. They take disappointment well, and they react to disappointment by learning from it and trusting that they didn't get to law school by mistake. I'll tell you a story to back that up, because I think that to make the point more poignant. I have students that I still talk about very fondly. I think I talk about a student each time I start my thoughts lectures. in the third midterm, the student got a 3 out of 30 in the midterm. And, you know, I was shocked when I discovered this after I unveiled the grades, because this is the student who in class is always very engaged, deeply engaged, answers questions, seems to have a good sense about taught law. And so I didn't quite understand how that could have happened. And she came to my office because she also didn't understand how that could have happened. And we determined that the problem was that, you know, you can be very smart about a lot of things. You can be a very intelligent person. But law exams are a totally different beast. Law is a different language. And people don't see it that way. When you show up in law school, you're learning a language. And if you don't have any clue about the language you're trying to learn, of course, it's going to be difficult to learn it. You're not just learning how to speak it. You're learning the cultural codes behind it. There's a way of being that comes with it. There's a logic to it. And it seemed as if she knew the material, but she didn't understand the logic and the language to express what she knew. So we talked about that. And that for me is really key. She did not stop at disappointment. She did something about the disappointment. She trusted herself enough to know that this is not all she's capable of. She didn't lay the blame on me. She didn't lay the blame on the exam. She didn't go, you know, this professor is trying to get me. She didn't stop speaking to me, which is something that has happened. She didn't write me a bad review on Rate My Professor, which is something that has happened as well. She didn't take it that, you know, this is a Black professor who doesn't know what they're doing, which is something that's happened to me. You know, people say, you know, obviously he's not smart and he's a tough grader. No, she came to my office and said, you know, help me understand how to do better. And we talked about it. In the final exam, as I was grading her paper, I didn't know I was grading her paper, but I thought the paper I was grading, I thought the person stole my marking guide. It's crazy how good it was. On the basis of her final exam, she ended up with the best mark in the course. So she rallied. She didn't let disappointment stop her. She actually went back, took for what she did in the midterm, and then rallied to the best grade in the course. I tell that story because that to me is what a really good law student should be doing. If you're trying to learn a new language, don't stop at disappointment. You may not have the disappointment. You may just come in and just ace it and just be, you know, maybe that's your path. But in my experience, that's not usually the path for many people. I've met law students who are surprised by how well they did. And I've met the ones who are deeply disappointed that given how smart they are, they didn't do as well as they thought. But they react to it in all kinds of ways. And I think the ones who end up, this student went on to become the best graduating student, went on to become, you know, she clerked at the Supreme Court. Obviously, there's something there. And I think, you know, whenever I tell the story and people relate it to the name and they're like, 3 over 30, how is that possible? Because they know what she's capable of. And I'm like, yeah, she was able to rally from disappointment. So that's the sort of the long story that leads me to, you know, don't let the pressures of law school convince you that you're not worth it or that you're not supposed to be there. There's a lot of imposter syndrome that happens in law school. A lot of people who are telling you you're not smart, that are smarter than you. A lot of people who have the privilege that allows them to present themselves as the ones who are on something that is a new language to them as well. Don't be swayed by all of that. You have a relationship with your professors, stick to that relationship. Don't let disappointment and don't let fear stop you from tapping into the knowledge that they have that they want to share. And that brings me to my second point, which is don't get caught up in the drama of law school and be careful who you take advice from. Your colleagues are not the best source of advice for how to do well in law school. even your senior colleagues, I'm sorry, I mean, 2L and 3L. I'm sorry to say that, but 2L and 3L, to give you advice about how to do well in torts, the person who was hired to do that is your professor, so go to your professor. And I tell my students every year, if somebody says to you, this is what you should do in torts or in constitutional law, ask for their grade. What was your grade? Would be my next question. And, if you better be an A+, or I'm not taking advice from you. And even if it's an A+, I'm still going to go to my professor. So that, to me, is what I see in the best law students. And the advice I have is, don't get caught up in the drama. Don't let it overwhelm you, and get your advice from the best source. But above all, enjoy it. When I was in law school, I went to law school at 17, and the very first thing someone told me was, you don't just go through university, you have to let university go through you. You really have to pick up more than just book learning in university. If you're in law school, it's a time to make friends, build relationships, discover the other things that you're good at, nourish your mind as much as possible, take courses that are interesting, that broaden the mind, in addition to the core courses. Be adventurous, build relationships with your professors, with staff at the law school, expand your network, the usual stuff that they tell you. But above all, just trust in yourself and try as much as possible not to let the disappointments and the drama hold you back, because there's a ton of it among the A types that we recruit at law school.
You gave us so many good nuggets, so many good pieces of advice. But in closing, I just want to give you just a moment to kind of say anything to our students, anything that you have on your heart, anything that you want them to know, if it's advice, if it's a quote, just anything that's on your mind right now.
Hey, so I'm going to be addressing this to Black law students. I know it can be sort of difficult to think of your role as not just being about you. In many ways, it is about you, but it's also about your community. We really have to understand that we can't just be there for ourselves. We have to be there for raising our community as far as the law goes. There's a lot of problems in our society that the law can help us resolve, but that law, as it stands right now, does not work for Black people. And it's kind of weird to put on ourselves the responsibility of having to think about it all the time and having to correct that. But it is one of those things that we are in the best position to actually be able to do, because we understand the problem. We've lived the problem. We understand it intimately, and we have the means to begin to change it. So I suppose I'm asking for you to go about doing the things that matter to you in the way they matter to you, but to leave a small portion of your attention, or maybe, more than small, a sizable portion, or maybe all of it if you're so inclined, to the needs of the Black community. Give a little bit of yourself to raising the profile of the Black community in relation to law in this country. Nobody's going to change it for us. Nobody's going to care about it as much as we do. Nobody's going to help us bring about the kind of change that we need. So we're going to have to do it ourselves. And I know, it's a terrible thing to be putting on us, the responsibility and the weight of having to change the things that we didn't create, but it is what it is. If we don't do it, no one's going to do it for us. So help your fellow students. Stick together, help your community. If you have the time to volunteer in the community. If you become a big, I don't know what the street is in Calgary, or the street is in Bay. If you become a Bay, let's go with Bay Street. If you become a big Bay Street lawyer, save a portion of your time for something that raises the Black community. Yeah.
Thank you once again so much, Professor Ogbogu, for joining us today, for dropping all of those gems. Again, this was the BLSA Canada Fireside Chat. It was a pleasure to hear from you. You are a role model for many law students, such as myself, across the country, and it really cannot be stressed enough how much the world needs advocates like you. So keep doing what you're doing. We love and appreciate you. And just thank you.
Thank you so much. This was amazing. Thanks for the chat. I really appreciate it.